This makes them earthly gods. With a tiny minority, they rule over humanity, systematically stealing our commercial energy through the money system, with the majority of the population completely unrealizing that their commercial energy is being stolen, just like a counterfeiter. Number 3, unconventional warfare. I used to read Mad magazine when I was little, and they had a cartoon of spy versus spy. Well, this is the exact paradigm that the bankers do. They finance both the left and the right to fight each other, in the exact same way that the bankers simultaneously finance the Democrats and the Republicans to divide and conquer humanity. They finance communism and capitalism. I know it seems like a stretch, but the whole thing is an elaborate puppet show. Regardless of whether we vote Democrat or Republican, or even Libertarian, the bankers control all of the different political systems because they control the money system. Irrespective of who we vote for, those politicians have to work for the bankers' money, just like we do. Thus, we all, in little ways, have to sell our soul in order to earn money from the bankers. It's kind of like the bankers control the dog treats, right? You know how you can train a dog with the rewards of puppy treats? You can teach them to sit, beg, roll over. Well, that's exactly what the bankers do with the money system. We learn to sit, beg, and speak over topics that are approved by the bankers. This presentation is not approved by the bankers.
I just told you what started the Great Depression. Let me tell you what ended it. World War II. And all of a sudden, the same banks that said no money for farms, no money for food, put people in soup lines, no money for commerce, no money for railroads, no money for roads, no money, no money. All of a sudden said, war? And all of a sudden, factories that were closed down began to work 3 shifts. Where'd the money come from? The same pockets that refused to give it before. Because they decide when it will be printed, how much will be printed, and how much usury or interest will be paid. Not the federal government. The federal government has no say in it, as I will prove to you. By the simple manipulation of a few wealthy bankers, World War II ended the Great Depression.
Qualities of the usurpers. Number 1, we've demonstrated that they're thieves and they've stolen the power to issue money. They're usurpers and monopolists. Number 2, they're earthly gods and they're psychopaths. Well, how can we prove that they're psychopaths? The usurpers, or the usurers, or the moneylenders, den of thieves, or as Jesus called them, mammon, they play the role of both arsonist and firefighter. That means they both initiate the fire and they then come to put the fire out. Well, why do they do that? Well, it's order out of chaos that benefits them. The reason that it brings order out of chaos is, if there was lack of political drama, it would be very obvious to us how the bankers were ruling over us. It would be very plain to see that the bankers were simply issuing our IOUs. But by keeping us in chaos, by keeping us in confusion as to who the true enemy is, by getting us caught up in political theater, we see all this drama and it puts us into a state of fight or flight, like a primitive animal. We don't use our higher thinking capacity to realize that we can easily emancipate ourselves from this paradigm simply by issuing our own money. By keeping us divided and conquered and confused with deliberate acts of false flags, counterintelligence programs, and engineered events, we are always in a state of fear. That's how they rule, through order out of chaos. to demonstrate how they actually have admitted that they're psychopaths, let's talk about Operation Norwoods. This is a declassified Cold War document from 1962, approved by the Pentagon, which documents bankster finance terrorism. And remember, you know, people would say, oh, that's the government doing that. Well, the government doesn't do anything that's not financed by the bankers. Somebody's paying for it. And as they say, he who pays the piper calls the tune. In effect, the government acts as a mercenary group. Delving into Operation Norwoods is to understand that at the period the Cold War was raging, they were deliberately engineering events to go to war with Cuba. You know, mind you, the Soviet Union was being financed by these same bankers, and the Soviet Union was in turn financing Cuba. So all of this stuff is engineered, but what we're trying to prove is that they would deliberately stage terroristic events. So when we talk about the war on terrorism that the politicians are always talking about, we have to realize it's the bankers who are financing the war on terrorism and then having it implemented through agent provocateurs in and out of the government. Let's read the box there. It says, the description of pretexts which will provide justification for the U.S. military intervention in Cuba. They're looking for a reason to go to war. So the next box reads, they want to finance a Cuban terror campaign. Casualty lists in U.S. newspapers will cause a helpful wave of national indignation. Number 4, we could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area and in other Florida cities and even in Washington. Here it says, let's blow up a U.S. ship just like we did the USS Maine. This is a false flag. In the box it says, A, we could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame it on Cuba. Like psychopaths. Or we could hijack and shoot down an airliner. Number 7, hijacking attempts against civil and surface craft. Number 8, it's possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a charter civil airliner en route to the United States. Listen to these guys. And again, this was approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Psychopathic generals doing the bidding of psychopathic presidents, doing the bidding of psychopathic bankers. Let's go into the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was the false flag excuse to bomb North Vietnam, promoted and supported by the Communist Chinese and the Communist Soviet Union, which each were financed by the international bank cabal. In this short video, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara is going to comment on the Gulf of Tonkin incident of August the 4th, 1964. By the way, that's 2 years after Operation Norwoods, where he admits that the Gulf of Tonkin incident did not happen.
No, it was just confusion. And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong.
So what's the outcome of the Cold War? Number 1, many of the threats of communism have actually come true in the United States. So what they do is they hype the threat of communism so that good-meaning people go to war and are willing to die. Both my mother and father, my brother and myself all volunteered to go to war, just like the members of the military that were protesting the Federal Reserve in the beginning of this presentation. Well, they wake up, they get angry, and they see who the real terrorists are. Because while we go and fight these patsy enemies, not that the communists weren't killing people, not that they didn't commit genocide, but what ends up happening is through the back door, a police state has been created in the United States. The godless commies that we were supposed to be afraid of in the Soviet Union, this massive atheism movement has come into the United States where you're no longer allowed to put a nativity scene in the public square. The 10 Commandments have to be taken down. And in the Soviet Union, remember how the Soviets didn't have real elections because regardless of who you picked the Communist Party? Well, that's exactly what we have in the United States. Regardless of who we pick, we are picking a bank puppet that's going to be working for the bankers for banker money. Number 2, millions have died. Millions have suffered. And millions of people have ongoing cancer from Agent Orange, etc., etc. Number 3, trillions of dollars have been added to the national debt. $13 trillion in inflation-adjusted dollars have been spent on that phony Cold War. Are you disgusted like we are?
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
Wag the Dog. Remember that movie where they staged a pageant about war to get everybody all worked up? Well, what do you need for a war? Well, you need a boogeyman. And there's endless supply of boogeymen. Well, think about it, going back to Hitler. Well, wasn't Hitler Time's Man of the Year for a couple times? Wasn't Stalin the Time Man of the Year? Wasn't Osama bin Laden? All of these guys were promoted by the West at various times, along with Saddam Hussein, Manuel Noriega. Over and over this thing happens.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
So it's happening today where, seen in the picture, you take a boogeyman, put it up in Syria, and the United States has a cause, an excuse to go to war.
It's going to show some of those weapons from Benghazi ended up in the hands of ISIS. So we helped build ISIS.
And that's what the bankers want. They always want us to be at war. Isn't that exactly what the devil wants? Doesn't the devil just want us to be at war, dividing and conquering and killing each other, enslaving one another? Well, that's exactly what has happened to planet Earth. And that's why all of the prophets told us to forbid usury, usurpation. Innovated slavery. A, we all feed the beast which is warring on us. B, we cannot buy or sell without taking the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is the usury-based Federal Reserve note. There's a pyramid on the back. That signifies Pharaoh. Pharaoh was acting as a man god, an earthly god. Well, obviously Pharaoh didn't create the heavens, animals, planet Earth. But by controlling and monopolizing the money system, he, all by himself, could rule over thousands, hundreds of thousands, and enslave them. Unfortunately, we all have a terminal addiction. We have to admit that we're enslaving ourselves through the money system, and that if we don't change it, we are going to die. And in fact, even if we don't die physically, we're not living our true life, our authentic life, a life free of fear, poverty. Life is defined by achieving and self-actualizing, achieving the true potential of our soul. Well, humanity is not achieving its highest potential, and it's time that we do. Let's review. Number 1, we discussed sovereignty versus usurpation. The sovereign, who is the true sovereign? He who creates, controls. Obviously, God or the Creator is the sovereign. The problem is these man gods have usurped the sovereignty of God on planet Earth. That's why Jesus flipped the money lenders' tables. That was an affront to God. It's time for us to turn the tables too. Number 2, how the bankers corrupted the money system They basically counterfeited our chicken notes. Number 3, unconventional warfare. It's essential for us to realize that what's going on in planet Earth isn't an accident. This isn't just about profit. This is about an intentional form of slavery on humanity. No man can serve two masters.